I absolutely adore the rain. I know, sunshine is pretty and warm, and on a summer day, hanging out in someone's yard with lawn games, you could convince me to be a sun person. But there's just something about the rain. There's no pressure to be out enjoying life when the sky is gray and the roads turn to rivers. It's like the world itself is feeling a bit down and embracing the clunky metaphors that fill our heads in moments of melancholy, saying, "It's okay, you can cry too." I guess that means I've just always been that kind of moody person, all the way from my fondest memories of playing Pokemon Sapphire as the raindrops pinged off the car window to contemplating the direction of my life as they splashed in the stream behind where I live. Really, it's an excuse to be what we might call a bit cringe, to let out those faux philosophical armchair ramblings and affect anyone cursed with the contemplation of life's mysteries. This kind of self-indulgent moody setting is part of what draws me into the cyberpunk genre so often, and of course the seminal Blade Runner from 1984 is no exception. Considering we did a whole hour-long dive into cyberpunk works before, it was only natural we'd eventually reach the adaptation of Philip K. Dick's work, which helped to solidify the genre in the minds of so many. The rain in Blade Runner is cheesily levels of heavy and constant, taking over most of the exterior scenes and even the climactic interior ones. It's pervasive into spaces it shouldn't be, stressing a lot of what the movie is saying. I think it sets the stage for that same kind of pass rain draws out of us, the brooding sadness so crucial to the noir elements often paired with cyberpunk works. The lighting is dim in smoke-filled rooms, they're surrounded by high-tech advertisements speaking of a better world as they live in run-down, soaked buildings. The city goes on as far as the eye can see, but it's industrial, unwelcoming. The world is seen on large and small scales, but no matter what, it feels distant, dreary, mundane, and even cold and detached. Everyone is surrounded by life, the most extreme hustle and bustle you could imagine, but it's all still quite lonely. It feels like everyone is trying so hard to get nowhere at all. And this is shown in no one more than Deckard, of course. He's a retired Blade Runner, an enforcement officer tasked with hunting down replicants, synthetic humans used for slave labor on off-planet colonies, made illegal on Earth after a quelled uprising a few years prior. On the Nexus 6 model, the distinction between human and synthetic has become as blurred as ever, distinguished only in a test which mirrors the nature of this world, the Voight-Kampff test. Proctored by a Blade Runner with this otherworldly machine, it reads the subject's vitals in response to emotion-provoking questions. Asked nonsensical and exaggerated queries like about turtles upside down in deserts, the subtle distinctions become measurable, and the determination can be made. Does the subject before them live freely as a human, or die as an illegal life? It's certainly cold and detached, having to take place in a dark room while the runners ask questions from a script dryly or interrupt the subject with a mad machine buzzing and humming the whole time. For a test to determine life, it feels entirely unnatural. The whole setup of the Voight-Kampff test gives off the most let's get this over with and get home vibes as possible, perfectly fitting with the endless hustle of an expansive mundanity that is their world, and of course with everything that is Deckard. The epitome of the grizzled detective forced back in for one more job. That is his exact situation as he's called back in to track down a team of 4 replicants who killed and hijacked their way back to Earth. He drinks straight drinks in between telling people to f**k off without telling them to f**k off when he says things like,
Replicants are like any other machine. They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem.
When he sees a lifelike replicant, his thoughts are about how much it costs, nothing about its lifelike capacities. Most specifically is with Rachel, the experimental Nexus 7 model of replicant. While the 6s take 20 to 30 questions to determine in a Voight-Kampff test, she takes over 100. Beginning to suspect that she might not be a replicant though herself, she comes to Deckard with photos proving her past, memories of herself and her mother, trying to convince the man who's convinced she is not human that she is human. But Deckard's response is cold and dismissive. With no cushion whatsoever, he tells her that her memories and pictures are from her curator's niece. She was simply made to look like someone else so they'd fit with her. He recounts past events that he would have no way of knowing right at her, vivid memories which once assured her humanity, now confirming that everything she knows is a lie. Deckard has no hesitation to put someone through this pain. When she begins to cry in response to this, he backtracks, calling it a bad joke and repeatedly telling her just to go home. He's playing cleanup duty. All he wants is the simplest resolution to this situation, getting her out of his hair. It's not about her being human or not. That's a pain he has no understanding of and so no care for. It's about her bothering him and him wanting her to be whatever bothers him least. His skill that's so highly regarded is getting to the point. It's not humanity or compassion that made him the best, it's essentially just getting things done quickly. His energy is as if he can't be bothered to do anything, so he just powers through it so at least it can be over with and he can be done and he can be at home alone. And his home says a lot about him as well. When we see his home, it's not really that impressive. It's a messy, slobbish hole in the 96th floor. This is what he's so desperate to not be bothered so he can be at. What does it say that drinking here alone is the preferable option to him? It feels like it's just ignoring the bustling world around him, which paired with his lack of bullshit personality seems to say something. Is the world around him one run by a man mucking about with new life forms for profit? Is it all just bullshit? Is it not worth engaging with at all? We can see something similar in J.F. Sebastian, a genetic engineer for the Tyrell Corporation, the company doing that mucking about. He suffers from a disease which rapidly ages his body as he looks like this despite only being 25. He lives in a massive building alone where rain leaks in through the roof and you can peek through unfinished and damaged walls. His dwellings are awful, but within them reside countless friends he's made for himself, animatronics which welcome him home or sit with him during a meal. They're cobbled together forms housing programs he wrote for himself to feel less alone. All of these people around, and here's JF building himself friends. Are the connections out there just not valuable? Did they all turn him away for his condition, showing their own lack of any care for something outside the norm and mundane? Like Deckard, he returns home alone to do really nothing at all. Even working for the most profitable, prominent corporation out there, this is what he lives doing. Literally building his connections. This is his version of drinking, a distraction from a world which is so awful that massive advertisements in the sky are telling you to go off-world for a fresh start. It is a form of ignorance to life itself, ignoring that it is to be alone, or ignoring it to build friends, ignoring the common thread which binds every creature granted life together in death. They are working to nothing, going nowhere at all, but yet they keep going, surrounded by anything and everything, but feeling fulfilled in none of it. This isn't life, it's maintenance. It's keeping a form alive because that's what one does. They scrap and scavenge and scrounge and get by, but that's it. That's all. That's the normal human perspective of the Blade Runner world. In those off-world colonies the ads reference, we find a perspective much different than the humans on Earth, the replicants created to serve them. Intellectually, they're at least on par with humans. Physically, they're stronger, and emotionally, they're, well, nothing, created devoid of feelings. At least for a time, but given enough life and experience, the replicants will begin to feel. And so a control mechanism was put in place, a 4-year lifespan. Ideally, in heavy quotes ideally, before they begin to know emotion, they expire. But if it doesn't work out, ideally, what you have is someone with the faculties of an adult, but even greater strength, and the emotional maturity of a child, suddenly faced with the knowledge of their impending death. A death implanted in them by a definite creator. Where we must scream in agony to the skies, they can find their target on Earth itself. They can reason, have the power to act above their will, and find extreme anguish due to their creator's implanted flaws. In the same way we curse God, why would they not do the same, but track theirs down? This is what Roy and 3 other replicants, the ones Deckard is tasked with retiring, set out to do. They return to Earth and slowly track down Tyrell to ask a simple request: more life. And they do this exceedingly well. Despite having one failed attempt to directly breach, they go on to find employment in his company, get close to other rich men with power, and befriend those who can get close to him as they move with a purpose and try to accomplish their goal using the world and the people around them in any way they need to get what they want. A stark contrast to the humans who seem to just be trudging through common days, well, commonly. Quickly, they succeed at securing a meeting with Tyrell through our previously mentioned J.F. Sebastian, who they lord out by appealing to his loneliness. Pris, one of Roy's 4, hides in garbage outside his building and acts shocked when he happens by, playing to his natural kindness and compassion for another lonely being as he hands her the bag that she dropped. Despite pretending to be terrified, Pris remains close and at points really forces the interaction to continue. It feels very forced against JF, but she suckers him in so easily. After all, she's the first friend he hasn't had to build himself. And what's a warning sign if you've never seen one before? Their plan relied on this world's inherent loneliness. It relied on a man who was willing to fall for any change to his life, even one so obviously a trap. When Roy joins later with some masked threats, JF takes the enigmatic replicant to see Tyrell rather easily, where their manipulation, of course, continues. Naturally, there is some sort of check before anyone can just come up and see Tyrell, especially late at night. JF and Roy are stopped mid-elevator ride up to him, where Tyrell questions the purpose of his visit. However, Roy secretly directs JF on how to win a chess game he and his boss had in limbo between their homes, with the exact move Sebastian believed couldn't work. The queen moves forward to place the king in check, even though a knight will easily take the most powerful piece on the next turn. And it does. But this also leaves a checkmate open with the right move of a bishop. JF wins his second ever game against Tyrell, who then invites them up after what feels like a subtle insult about milk and cookies, as if to say his opponent is comically childlike. What this move is saying is simple but effective. JF saw the move Roy wanted to make earlier, but said it wouldn't work because the queen got taken. And Tyrell, seeing the move happen, did exactly what Sebastian said would make the move fail, taking the most important piece. There was a clear cost-benefit scale here, a large loss for no gain. If you only look at that move, if you get wrapped up in what's happening right in front of you and ignore the surroundings, it's true. Roy was thinking a move ahead, losing the battle to win the war. In short, Tyrell missed the big picture. A form of ignorance which I feel ties him nicely with the other humans. They all seem to focus on what's there but miss a larger point. Whether it's building friends or retiring replicants, they're doing the same thing, missing the overall tone and point of their lives, each day passing by with little value, getting through work to get home to nothing, or soaking up the pain with built friends or alcohol. These are people who don't want to look on the larger scale. They probably know they wouldn't like what they see. Pointlessness leading to death. The replicants, however, don't have the luxury for this ignorance. They don't have the ability to say tomorrow will be the day they address their lives and their doom. They don't have the time with their emotions for them to grow stale and overgrown with daily life. They don't have the time to grow numb. They need an answer and they need it now. And in their god, they only find tired cliches and a representation of the flawed world which bore them as slaves. Tyrell is creating what should be grand innovations of the very fabric of life itself, and yet when he speaks of those advancements, it's only about business and profit. He creates a life form greater than human beings, but limits it to never be aware of that fact and to be shipped off to do forced labor. He created something so grand, so advanced, so stunning, and yet it was limited to the bounds which we have already known. That isn't innovation, it's the status quo with more profit. He, one with the power to change the world, sought not to do anything to change it, to remain ignorant of the big picture. Further similarly to Deckard and the others, what he offers in response to the emotions of a replicant is cliché. Most notably, he remarks,
"The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long."
A sentence which has never been of any comfort to anyone who has heard it. What he wants is simply a resolution to the situation. He wants Roy to leave with some imparted, once again in heavy quotes, wisdom, which of course a god like Tyrell should be able to provide. His creation is dying right beside him, and he offers a pat on the back and an attaboy. After all, Roy's done extraordinary things, right? Be happy with the implanted flaws. Ignore the big picture. Seeing no solution and nothing of value in this, Roy kills Tyrell and then JF, who was fleeing. He saw he was greater than his creator, but was made to die first anyway, and corrected that fact. God is dead by his hand, and there is no salvation. With no solution, he's forced to be face to face with his death and no hope of survival. He's forced to compromise on the idea of what more life means. Something else Blade Runner stresses is memories, which you can see an expansion upon in the works which it went on to influence. I don't want to backtrack onto those, so I'll be somewhat brief, but essentially the root is this. How would you prove to me right now that you exist? Would you pull up pictures with others, things you shared with them, knowledge of how the universe works or different principles? When we boiled all of these down, we usually reach memories. Pictures are just physical memories. The times you shared are stored within your mind, and your knowledge is a product of memory since you have to remember things to recite them and recall them and use them. Everything about our proof lies in memory, which we see with Rachel. Photos are what she could offer, but memories are fluid. There is no true proof. The fear here that Ghost in the Shell really expands upon is what she goes through. How do you know you're even real when memories can be manipulated? How can you right now show me that your memories are truly yours and not something implanted in you or even imagined by yourself? But what matters for us today is that they are the only proof. A fact of life is that one day we will die and that all will remain of us is memory. The source of joy of recalling fond moments while someone is alive turns into the dispersal of pain after they're gone, as we are solidified forever in the only immovable state a human can ever achieve, where we no longer decide and no longer change because we can't, cold and rigid in death. It's a sad fact that this universe is an endless expanse, and we rest upon a small rock within it, and we will likely never even see the extent of that rock, let alone the universe itself. Each life is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of all that could be. We can't scar the universe, we can only leave a mark of our existence on our level, on other fractions, other life. You could argue this is why we seek others at all, because their remembrance of us is the only solace from death. They both distract us from the end, and even though we can't live longer through them, we can live in them as a memory. It is the only solution, and it is a small bit of hope within despair, a reminder that only comes when we take in the big picture. We must make our impact on others. This is the only way of defeating death, the common foe of everyone, the biggest picture. This is what Roy does with Deckard. Before meeting with Tyrell, he lost two of his companions, and upon returning he finds the last one dead. He has no one left to carry on what little someone could of who he was, and in this he faces the second death almost right away. Unable to stop the first one, all he can do is make an impact, and he does. He imparts the replicant perspective on Deckard. Despite having every chance in the world to kill the Blade Runner, Roy instead challenges him, breaks his fingers and makes him try to shoot, chases him to the roof and forces him to jump the gap, and then stands above him, letting him fall into the very last moment when he reaches down and catches him, where Deckard should have died. As he lords above Deckard, he provides the point of it all when he says,
"Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave."
By creating this impactful moment, and then showing the kindness and empathy to save Deckard and leave him with wisdom we'll address shortly, Roy prevents his death from being an absolute nothing. He leaves a man wholly representative of the human funk with something new to carry, and if it influences his being, then a part of the replicant who left him with it will live on forever as well, a bit of his spirit carried forward. A memory which won't be lost like tears in the rain, as all of his are soon to be. A perspective full of things humans could never imagine, lost to time and almost totally forgotten. The attack ships on fire, the sea beams glowing, these are things which we never see, an important note of the movie holding back. Roy spells it out once more.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
We aren't supposed to see these things. The point is that we can't, that we have no frame of reference for what he speaks of at all. We need someone else to explain them because we can't. We need a perspective that isn't our own because we are only a small fraction of a small fraction of a small fraction and nothing more. The only way we grow is with other perspectives. Imagine our whole world and how much there is to see and how little of it we probably will. Imagine how many people never go further than a few states or one country over. Imagine how much seeing all this could change their perspective, show them a world with more to understand, and as such make them more understanding. Weighed down by so much at all times, we are forced to suffer from a limited perspective. When you have to be in the same place every day at the same time, you can't be broad. We are all going anywhere and nowhere at once because our limitation is only made worse. We are grand, innovative life forms placed within extreme balance so that a status quo isn't broken. There is so much wrong, and nothing can be fixed without understanding it. And if we are forced to be limited, then we can only remove that limitation with the perspective of others. This is the climax of Blade Runner. It is someone passing on all those things to widen the narrow view of someone locked into limitation and stagnation. In their world, there are people who have seen such amazing things, and they either die before they can pass them on, or hunted down and killed if not. The replicants have a valuable perspective, one almost directly contrary to human beings. Where we live long, drawn-out lives, slowly becoming full of experience and as such dulled through repetition like any tool, they are essentially children. Part of growing up is the fact that each time we feel an emotion, it's more dulled and less effective. I've seen someone I love go to rehab 3 times now. Every single time I was at work right after it happened because that's our shitty, inhumane system that keeps turning. But the first time I was in the back constantly trying desperately to hold back my tears. The second time it was 10 minutes in my car and some sad music while I worked. The third time it was almost like any other day. Each time it had the same impact on the physicality of my life, how my days played out, but the reaction to it lessened. The rain had beaten down on the rocks and eroded their harsh edges into smooth, efficient curves to pass over. To keep going, we wear down the edges so we feel less, but so our perspectives become more shallow. But Roy and his crew behave in quite childlike ways, whether it's placing eyes on shoulders or screaming in absolute agony at pain or running around and howling like a wolf during a fight. One of the best details of the movie is that they behave as someone truly new to this world and without the dull edges of repetitious emotions would. Each feeling is new and powerful. They are new to this world and the emotions that come with it, undulled by longevity, retaining the warmth that comes with novelty. Everything is new, so everything is memorable, a first time full of excitement and wonder and pain and suffering alike. In a world of people trudging through these same dull moments, they are the opposite perspective. They don't have the luxury of moving slow and growing numb to combat the fear of the inevitable. Their lifespan simply doesn't allow it. Roy takes that fear and makes it pertinent for Deckard, explaining why he seemingly tortures his foe but allows him to live. Roy had to make Deckard live the things that Roy had. The feeling any replicant would know which informs their perspective. The fear of a much more limited life, of always impending death. In this moment, Deckard hanging over the ledge, they know the same fear. The human is forced to feel an emotion which is new and sharp. The only difference is Roy has had to come to terms with it after Tyrell failed him, while Deckard has been a human ignoring it for his whole life, living in ignorance. And after this, he no longer does. Deckard leaves the fight to return home and secure Rachel, who he'd built a forceful bond with before this showdown. They confirm a love and trust for each other, and knowing that she'll be hunted as illegal life, they flee, presumably up north to where she mentions earlier in the movie, but nothing is confirmed. We don't see if they succeed, or how, or why, or where. All we see is a man committed to something new, to embracing these feelings which can still move and motivate him in the ways the mundanity of this city and his role had not for years. This is a stunning change for the runner who earlier told a replicant that her entire life was a lie without even a second thought. We see that Roy's lesson worked. Deckard lives on anew, a man changed by feeling things he wouldn't believe. What we see in Blade Runner is a man consumed by his world, changed for the better by the perspective of another man declared an illegal form of life, dull emotions confronted by one still sharp, and a death long away forced to feel so near and close. This awakened ending is only reached because Deckard was exposed to the perspective of someone not just different from him, but whose perspective was explicitly not allowed to exist because it threatened to change this cold world. The idea is not just that we must listen to all perspectives, but that there are some which we really need to listen to, ones which are limited and marginalized both by class and body, and that what they could show us is often something we wouldn't believe that would make this world, living it in a dull way, unbearable and change us for the better. Imagine describing to someone what you feel is the greatest pain your body has ever known, but they have never felt pain greater than a simple scratch. How far will even empathy go if their frame of reference has never even covered your very being? But we can't all just start breaking each other's fingers or holding each other over rooftop ledges to share the feeling of pain we know that they don't. We can't conclude that pain needs to be a forced occurrence. We also can't decree that pain should always stay fresh and new to motivate us more. If everyone behaved childlike like the replicants, if we all became overwhelmed by every emotion, our world would collapse. Some degree of dullness to emotions which causes this disconnect is a necessity even for empathy. If we were all total empaths connected in pain, then the torture of one would halt the entire species. So what's left to us in all of this? Is there any semblance of an answer? There kind of is. What's left is to share when it's our time, to listen when it's not, and to learn from it all. If we can't feel other people's pain, then care for them so you learn how it affects someone, and at the very least care that it's impacting someone you love. Try to get it, adapt what you can of your own situation to make sense of theirs. And if you really can't do anything at all, if you feel there's nothing you can do, never stop listening. Just being there and hearing it can sometimes mean more than we ever know, and sometimes be the correct thing to do. It's almost annoying when people believe they understand every form of pain because no one does. There's a lot of unique situations and we have to adapt to them all. It's really not an easy thing, but it is all we can do to ensure our perspectives mesh and create better us's and a better world. Like usual, I have a little story of my own about all of this, but this time I didn't plan the script around it or figure that I'd be talking about it at all. I just got to the end and realized I had more I wanted to say, and I'm literally adding it the night before you're going to see this. Maybe the whole video then is just me processing that emotion, and there's nothing more to what I produced than the pain dysfunction of someone desperately crying out for their place in the world, and even in statements like that, all I'm doing is appealing to your empathy to try and validate myself. But whatever the case, there's nothing more I can really do but keep talking. We'll be back to that mention of rehab from earlier. Even though I've seen people close to me go in and out of it, it's not something I've experienced myself, and particularly the withdrawal isn't, and that's really the issue. You can have a lot of willpower to make the decision to stop using initially, but eventually your body starts screaming at you to give it the thing it's become dependent upon. When you're hungry, your body produces a pain to motivate you to do so. You can say in a bit for a while, but it eventually becomes a matter of survival. There is no choice. When you see someone acting irrational because of substance abuse, it's not really irrational when you think about it like a severe pain. From what I've seen and had described to me, it's like a maddening anxiety. Your body is in constant motion to try and burn a relentless supply of energy, but you can't put that energy to anything specific because your mind is fixated too much on the chemical dependency to focus. It's gotten used to having that thing in order to function regularly. If you're used to cooking with pre-cut meat and I drop a live chicken in front of you, there is a prerequisite to function as you normally do missing, even though everything is technically there. Minutes become hours as each second has such an intense feeling, and you can't shut down enough to sleep, so the days themselves become even longer to draw out the pain, so you're not resting to refresh yourself, and it keeps going and going, cycling, each making the other worse. It's like thinking about that screw up at work so bad that your mind is racing with, is this how I get fired and stop getting a paycheck and lose my house and throw my entire life off track for hours and hours on end? Or the empty feeling of being in a new city, knowing no one and having nothing to do and wondering if you ever will again? Or the tension that knots your stomach after the famous "we need to talk." It's something like that, but you have the added stress of knowing you can stop the pain at any point, but only by making it worse and having to go through this all again later once more. You can already see the principle of the video at work and how I describe this. I'm comparing it to feelings I know which are similar because your mind will actively recall if you felt one of those things too and align your memories with what you're learning now and attaches it to a feeling. It's an easier path for empathy even if it isn't perfect. But those things aren't what gave me the perspective to forgive this person's action while they were struggling to be clean without going to a facility. Almost a year ago, my life fell a bit apart. The channel was nowhere close to succeeding as it is now. The editing work I found to replace my career path, which was and still is filled with awful and hateful people, completely dried up. And the mountain of debt from that flawed decision to have the degree for that career path and a soon-to-be lack of healthcare threatening to add even more to the pile was catching up. The exact timeline and situation was a bit more complicated, but as a video that took off gave me a glimmer of hope for the channel, I had a decision to make. Confirm and accept this job offer that started in a week, or risk becoming more than 2 years out of my professional work with my degree into such a lot less hireable and go on making my dream come true. If it works out and then fails later, then I'm something more like 3 or 4 years out of work and essentially unhireable with that degree. College was an unfortunately easy decision for me. I never thought I had a choice because I was told it was the only option, and I just picked the schools where my brother went first and where my best friend at the time went second when I transferred. This decision was the first time I was sat down making one which would generally change the direction about my entire life now that school wasn't forcing a change every 4 years or so. That's an odd thing about growing up for anyone still in school or younger watching this. Once you graduate, there is nothing creating a timeline for your decisions. Suddenly, if anything is ever going to change in your life again, it's mostly on you to decide when and where. No counselor or teacher, however apathetic, forces you to decide where to go next. It's terrifying and something almost no one is prepared for. I certainly wasn't. In the week contemplating this decision, I slept maybe 4 hours across 5 days. My thoughts would genuinely toss me over endlessly at night as I flopped back and forth between sides with each consideration. I held my head on the sides and pressed it against the bed as if the essence of life was about to leak from my ears and I desperately needed to hold it in to survive. The second a conclusion seemed apparent, all the negatives of it came rushing forward with the positives at the other side. Chase my dream and be happy, but maybe fail and live in a country where a low wage could never support me or let me retire, but I could take this job that gave me security but wake up with an already awful depression worsening each day, or go well in for the channel, but if any medical emergency came up, go bankrupt and lose it all, and start saving with the job to make a change in the future with a career, but wonder if I'll ever even live to see that future with the mental toll it would take each day. Back and forth and back and forth, it led to a physical reaction. I'd wince when my mind swapped, punch the bed as the same thought consumed me for the 18th time that hour, going over it again and again and again and reaching no different conclusion, only swapping back and forth. I couldn't eat, sleep was out of the question, and each day went on and on and on, no matter how many sitcoms I breezed through for background noise that did nothing. I thought I was 2 seasons through the last one. Turns out I'd seen all the way up through 6 and didn't even recognize it. When I remember this feeling now, I start feeling less angry that recently I got a call from an out-of-breath nurse saying that this person I'm speaking of jumped the fence and ran away at the second facility. Of course, it was a stupid decision, and although they raised some valid concerns and the center hardly seemed to respond to their needs, it was on them to make up for their mistakes. But they never said the same thing to me when I couldn't talk about anything but that decision on my mind something like a year earlier. They never said it was my responsibility to make up for that bad decision of career paths. What I got was instead a reassurance of support. They trusted I would make the decision which was right, and they'd give it time to play out and see. And they trusted that whatever it was, I would be strong enough and smart enough to make it work. They never cursed me for my mistakes and the seemingly nonsensical and immature decisions all this pain surrounding them led me to do. There was no anger or ill will or harsh deadlines, and that security helped me to make the struggles less intense, even if it clearly didn't allow me to make the decision I wanted. To them, the pain I felt didn't make sense. They'd never chased a dream or anything like that, or even had the opportunity to consider it. The situation was foreign, but they knew a similar feeling. The same one I'm now using to try and support them, the sleepless, anxious nights of a brain struggling to live. If they never struggled with addiction, they'd never have known how to support me right then. Empathy alone doesn't cover every base. It needs some kind of connection or platform to build on to be anything more than just a pat on the back and a "things will get better," a phrase I outright despise and wish people would never say again. When we have the perspective of others, we can move past that stupid saying to something more meaningful that's still not a chore to share because it's natural, because we've expanded and related to our feelings. But key to that is exposure to those pained perspective, and moments within the story I just told show that better than anything else. A hot, traffic-filled drive to the ER for any kind of relief from the intense anxiety of withdrawal had a sentence that's never preceded anything positive. Don't get mad at me for what I'm about to say. But to be honest, glancing out the window to see if the light up ahead had changed, I wasn't too worried. If they did something irresponsible, at least they were trying to do better at that very moment, and I did trust them. We moved forward, a bit closer to getting through the intersection to that one good decision, and I only gave a casual okay, because what was there more to say? We didn't make the painfully short light and paused in that unreasonable heat once more, and still and without any more sounds than passing cars, I heard something clearly that I can't possibly ever forget. Your recent transformation is part of the reason for this. The air hung even more still. I looked out the window again, but this time it wasn't to see the light. I could care less whether it never changed again. It was to keep them out of view entirely. Most of the drive after that remained speechless except for 2 sentences. What do I even say to that? Followed by, I don't know. There's clearly some missing context for why this all happened. Context that's led me to write and erase this last section so many times out of a very intense fear. This is me from a couple of years ago. It's really odd to see now with the long hair and all. And that's because this is me now. It's a little bit different. This is the transformation they meant in a statement that took responsibility off of them and placed it on me. I was doing something they couldn't handle, apparently. They couldn't come to terms with that kind of change, and they'd never even seen this full extent of it yet. You could only say something this stupid if you think it's easy for the person going through that change to handle. This is why I hate the phrase, things will get better, because I heard it all the time from people who've never had the misfortune of being mismatched with what society decided they were before they ever could. Some parts get better. You start to love yourself more and figure out the physicality and emotions of what you want and need. But that only comes from the pain of relearning how the fuck to live life, of figuring out you want to throw up if you're seen in anything you used to wear, and so you don't go out for weeks because you have nothing to wear and you literally feel like throwing up if you put any of it on in a scene in it. It's the pain of having to end intimate encounters because despite what you said about yourself, they still wanted you just to use your body for them and not for you and who you are. It's the pain of deciding you should be alone forever because unless you figure yourself out, it feels as if you're lying to people just to try and be loved. It feels like your own form disqualifies you from love. And some things never get better. Many workplaces will still have people who will openly and proudly state that people like you should be killed, and reporting it just makes you a target for HR. You'll still be at parties and hear people who you were just friendly with a few seconds ago say the same things because they don't know your secret, and your friends will do nothing to dissuade them because, oh, well, it would be awkward. You still have to learn that one of your parents thinks you need some kind of conversion therapy because they believe you're a sexually depraved monster. You'll still see legislators take your rights away in a slow campaign to eradicate your very existence. To be safe, you have to live as something you aren't. Your life isn't even really your own except for a few moments here and there. So it seemed only natural that sometimes it doesn't feel worthwhile living for some made-up person everyone calls you. And that's a thought I've had a lot. To irrevocably define myself forever in a way which undeniably states who I was. Solidifying my being forever in the only way we ever can. And someone who loves me said that transformation, that pain and everything that came with it, helped drive them back to addiction. I know there's someone who means well. I just went on about how they helped and supported me through my worst times. This clearly wasn't a statement of malice, but it was one of a painfully limited perspective. They have no frame of reference to understand how intense the pain can be. They have no idea of how far-reaching and long-lasting it can be. They have no idea that I already feel like a bother for who I am, and now, actually, apparently, it really genuinely hurts someone I love. To be the monster who only hurts people around them, Go ahead and confirm every thought I've ever had of reasons why I shouldn't exist in one statement. Go ahead and make me feel as if my work should be destroyed because who I am is just dangerous and I'm only gonna hurt people by sharing my thoughts. You don't say 2 + 2 = 5 because you were taught math and so you know doing so is stupid and wrong, and this is the emotional version of that. You can only say something so stupid and wrong like that if you've never allowed yourself to be taught with others' perspectives. Like someone dismissing an addict as irrational, they could dismiss a lot of me as simply enjoying this change, something I simply wanted to do for fun, not something I had to do to live. They missed the connection to themselves of doing something to survive in a meaningful way, unfettered by an anxiety that threatens to end it all just for peace and quiet. And part of the pain I have to carry with that is knowing that I must be that perspective. I have to sit down and have uncomfortable talks about the truth of it all to make the bridge for that empathy, even though it shouldn't be my responsibility. I have to be open and honest and possibly incur wrath if it means that there's more visibility to one day make that perspective common. I really don't want someone I love to die having never known the real me. I don't want a repeat of the past few losses of my life where some stupid, silly disconnect coming from my limited perspective made me never have a true connection with someone who's now gone, someone I should have loved and never even really knew. To know I had the chance and missed it, and I can't even say sorry. I can't change that my last words were such an ironic see ya. Every life deserves a better goodbye than see ya. I only get one chance at all of those things, and because of this forcibly applied label, I'm starting from behind like so many others with their own struggles. And even that doesn't disqualify me from having unlimited shitty perspective, like with that person who's now gone. We can all make that easier if we just open up and understand. The full solution isn't anywhere near simple, but the basis is really fucking easy. Just talk, communicate, try and understand the things others have seen that you would never believe. That's it, that's all. Oh, fuck off. Happy Pride or some shit. I don't fucking know.